Victor loved his girlfriend Christina very much. They had been dating for several months, and recently they had started discussing marriage. In fact, Christina had become Victor's fiancée, and everything seemed fine for them to start preparing for their life together. However, something had been bothering Victor lately. He noticed that Christina would have secretive phone conversations and sometimes disappear without explanation. On one hand, he could understand that she might be feeling nervous and in need of some time off for a few days, but the problem was that she wouldn't tell Victor where she was going. This made the groom suspect that he might be deceived. At the same time, he couldn't openly confront her about it because he didn't want to spoil the wedding and ruin their relationship. Victor came from a wealthy family, but he didn't consider himself a spoiled brat. He knew how to value and count money and didn't allow himself to spend it recklessly. For example, some of his acquaintances from affluent circles would give their loved ones luxurious cars as gifts. Victor saw such gestures as show-off and bravado, and he turned out to be right, because relationships in such cases usually didn't end well. The girls, being involved with such guys, would only indulge in luxury and demand increasingly expensive gifts. In his youth, Victor lost his parents in a car accident, and his upbringing was taken care of by his grandfather, Petr Borisovich. He taught his grandson to be wise, and at the same time instilled in him frugality, despite Victor being able to afford not to worry about money thanks to a successful business that brought in good income in memory of his deceased parents. His grandfather wouldn't allow him to squander money left and right and created a financial safety net for his future. In light of this, Victor began to doubt his fiancée. Too many factors were coming together. Victor remembered how his grandfather always planned several moves ahead, so he said, "You must be able to penetrate into another person. Imagine yourself as a chess player and determine the next move to become a king." His grandfather taught him many things, primarily to see through people. It could be said that Petr Borisovich literally instilled this science in him, but he had been gone for 2 years. That's why, armed with his grandfather's instructions and advice, Victor decided to test Christina and made arrangements with a family friend who worked as a head of a private clinic to accommodate him for some time. Victor planned to organize an effective hospitalization of Andrei Yevgenyevich and did everything possible to ensure that Victor wouldn't feel lonely. At the same time, the godson's request came as a surprise to him. "Are you sure this will help?" Andrei Yevgenyevich asked. "I think so," Victor replied. "At least, that's how I feel." "You know your actions, how should I put it?" The head of the clinic wanted to continue but hesitated. "Well, don't finish it." Victor wanted to say something cynical, but instead he said that word. "To be honest, yes," Andrei Yevgenyevich nodded. "I just haven't encountered such a situation. My Luba and I have been together for almost 30 years, and we've never had any reasons for mistrust." "Exactly, you've been together for 30 years, Victor supported him. "And I'm about to start a family, and I want to know if my bride has any secrets from me. I told you what's been happening with her lately, didn't I?" "Yes, I remember." The head of the clinic nodded. "Well, let's try as we agreed, but if anything goes wrong, it's not my fault. I don't want Christina to hate me for the rest of her life." "Great, Andrei Yevgenyevich, thank you." Victor shook his hand. The head of the clinic instructed the staff to assign a separate room for Victor. He intentionally didn't inform the personnel that the patient was someone close to him, so as not to disrupt the investigation. When Christina received a call from the head of the clinic, she was at a party, and it seemed that she wasn't even concerned about something happening to her fiancé. Upon learning from Andrei Yevgenyevich that Victor was in a coma, Christina hurried to come. She was greeted by the administration and escorted to the room. The head of the clinic entered the room with her. The patient lay unconscious on a special functional bed. A tripod with an IV drip stood nearby, and monitors on both sides beeped, displaying the patient's overall condition. Christina covered her mouth with her hand, and Andrei Yevgenyevich thought she was about to cry. He took a handkerchief from his lab coat pocket and handed it to her. "Take it. That mascara will smudge all over your face." "Thank you, I don't need it. I've already pulled myself together," Christina declined. "Doctor, how did this happen?" "He passed out in the car." "How did he get here?" Andrei Yevgenyevich replied. "It was an accident." "Such a horror," Christina exclaimed, her eyes widening. "No, there was no accident. Before losing consciousness, Victor managed to hit the brakes, and the car simply stopped in the middle of the road. Traffic police officers passing by discovered him." "Tell me, how long will he remain in this state?" Excitedly, Christina pointed at the sleeping Victor and asked, "Can't you tell me anything definite yet?" Andrei Yevgenyevich became flustered. "It all depends on the body, and how effective our treatment will be. But at least be prepared, Christina. It could be a few days or even months," he shrugged, replying as the head of the clinic. "What a horror," Christina repeated. "We were planning to get married. I've already informed all our relatives that I'm getting married. What do we do now, doctor?" "Well, we just have to wait, my dear," Andrei Yevgenyevich replied, patting her shoulder. "Well then, I'll leave you alone. You probably need some time to think." Andrei Yevgenyevich glanced briefly at Victor, raised an eyebrow, and from that look, Victor almost gave himself away. He not only heard but also observed what was happening, trying to do so discreetly so that Christina wouldn't suspect anything. And when his godfather turned his gaze on him, he almost burst out laughing. It took great effort for him to continue pretending to be asleep. "Leave the room, Andrei Yevgenyevich," he sighed deeply to himself and said, "Just hope she doesn't notice anything." At that moment, a nurse happened to pass by, and, hearing that the head of the clinic whispered something, cautiously asked, "Did you need something, Andrei Yevgenyevich?" "No, not yet. Go back to work." He waved his hand at her and went to his office. Alone in the room, Christina sat on the edge of the bed and took Victor's hand. She looked at him intently and smiled slightly. It may have been a defensive reaction. At least that's what Victor thought when he noticed the smile on her face. Continuing to play the role of a comatose person, he displayed remarkable acting skills. It was quite a feat to lie so still and not react to external stimuli. Christina tried to wake him up by pricking him with a pin. Victor could barely endure the pain. Not a single muscle twitched on his face, and his hand didn't flinch, as would usually happen to someone being pricked with a sharp object. No, Victor played his role brilliantly. All that was left was to wait for the next move from the bride-to-be, and she didn't keep him waiting for long. Christina took out her phone from her purse and started making the call. Victor strained his hearing, waiting for a response. The bride seemed to coo with the recipient of the call, saying, "Hi. Yes, I've missed you too. I wish we could be together already." Yes, the person on the other end seemed to respond positively, and Christina continued, "You won't believe it, darling, but that rich man ended up in the hospital by himself. I didn't even have to poison him." Victor almost broke character and jumped off the bed upon hearing such words from his bride. What he really didn't expect was his own death. It seemed that Christina had planned an attack on him and intended to use poison, but his coma had saved him from that execution. It was even terrifying to imagine what he would have had to endure. Victor's knees trembled under the covers, but thankfully Christina didn't notice because she continued talking on the phone. The situation was almost in the bag for the bride. All that was left was to arrange something with the nurse and inject something into the IV drip. Victor's heartbeat quickened, but luckily the machines only simulated functioning. Otherwise, Christina would have become alarmed and called the doctor. However, everything turned out fine, and Victor managed to calm his nerves. At the same time, he was shocked by the fact that his bride planned to use the nurse for murder. It seemed his suspicions about her were justified. It was good that he decided to pretend to be in a coma. It helped expose Christina. However, for now, he decided not to reveal himself. He needed to give his bride some time for active actions. Christina finished the call, kissed him on the cheek, and left the room as if nothing had happened. A few minutes later, Andrei Yevgenyevich arrived, but how did the audience with the bride go? "Poorly, very poorly," Victor replied. "What's the matter? Didn't she even shed a tear?" Andrei Yevgenyevich jokingly asked, unaware of what actually happened. "You won't believe it, but she wanted to kill me," Victor said. "Really? Now that's something." Andrei Yevgenyevich shook his head unexpectedly. "And how did her desire to kill you manifest itself?" "Well, her intention to kill you." Victor told his godfather that Christina was talking to someone on the phone. She conversed so sweetly with the person on the other end that it was easy to guess it might be her lover. She even confessed that she didn't have to poison her fiancé because he ended up in the hospital by himself. At that point, Victor paused and then continued. "And the most disgusting part is that Christina was planning to negotiate with the nurse to inject something into my IV drip." "Don't worry, that definitely won't happen," Andrei Yevgenyevich reassured him, placing his hand on his shoulder. "All the procedures, well, as you understand, they are just pretend. It will supposedly be done by Tatiana, as if she's the one taking care of you. She has already been informed about everything, and besides her, no one from the medical staff will come to you. And if," Victor speculated, "she won't do anything to you," Andrei Yevgenyevich replied, putting his hand on his shoulder. "Death won't be an option for the sisters. I have complete control over them. Besides, there's another person who won't add anything, because you'll be receiving it from the restaurant. My relative works there, you know him, Oleg Pavlovich." "Yes, Uncle Pasha often visited Grandpa," Victor nodded in agreement. "Well then, there's nothing to worry about," Andrei Yevgenyevich concluded. "By the way, should we report her to the police?" "No, there's no need to do that yet." Victor stopped him with a hand gesture. "Let's see what she does. and then we'll act accordingly. All right, as you say, Godson. If anything urgent comes up, call me on my cell immediately. Thank you, Andrei Yevgenyevich. I'm very grateful to you. Victor thanked him. The head of the department left the room, leaving him alone. Victor really needed to think seriously, first and foremost, about what to do with Christina. It would be more correct, of course, to reveal himself and tell her there was no coma and end things with her. But something told Victor that he should play out this role to the end. Internal intuition told Victor that interesting events lay ahead. At the same time, the question of who Christina was talking to remained unanswered. It was reasonable to assume it might be her lover, with whom she was talking so sweetly. However, Victor also speculated on another possibility. The person on the other end of the line could be an accomplice of his bride, and in that case, the situation was heating up. Because instead of her, that person would agree to eliminate Victor, and no one would suspect a thing, as everyone was expecting actions from Christina. Pondering this, Victor prepared himself for any turns of events, and meticulously inspected all the food delivered to him from the restaurant in the clinic. There was a laboratory, and Nurse Tatiana would send it for analysis, but nothing suspicious was found, and Victor ate everything calmly. Several days had passed since Christina last visited him. She hadn't shown up again, which made him think that his bride was plotting something. In the tedious anticipation of her next move, Victor decided to hire a detective. There was one agency in town where his acquaintance Dmitri worked. He arrived on the same day Victor called him. Not understanding what was going on, Dmitri rushed to the bed and blurted out, "Good Lord, did your competitors do something to you?" "Relax, Dim," Victor replied with a smile. "It's all part of the plan. I decided to test my fiancée, and it turned out she wanted to poison me." "No way," the detective exclaimed in surprise. "Exactly?" Victor nodded. "What do you think we should do next?" "I want to gather information," Victor suggested. "Collect everything you can find. And most importantly, keep an eye on what she's up to. She hasn't visited me for several days now, as if she's plotting something illegal." "I understand. I'll do everything," Dmitri nodded. "Don't worry about your safety. Everything will be under control." "Yes, my godfather is watching over me." Victor waved it off. "But still, my assistance in this matter won't hurt." "I insist, Detective," Victor said. "Dim, I hope you'll succeed." He patted his shoulder. "Don't even doubt it," Dmitri nodded. "I'll try to gather as much information as possible." After spending another 20 minutes with him, Dmitri left. Nurse Tatiana appeared next, bringing juice. "Oleg Pavlovich asked me to give this to you." "Thank you, and greetings from me to him," Victor thanked her. The nurse left, and he once again contemplated whether he had done the right thing by starting this game. On one hand, he had learned a lot about his fiancée, but on the other hand, he had shattered his own happiness, because now there could be no wedding or any mention of it. In light of these events, he had to think about his own safety. As Victor realized, Christina turned out to be quite a dangerous person and could use any means to send him to the other side. At the same time, unexpectedly, he met his childhood friend Alina within the walls of this clinic. She worked here as a surgeon, but in a different department. 3 years ago, her son and husband died during a joint fishing trip. Alina had advised Timur not to go because it was raining outside, but her husband reassured her that the weather would improve and nothing would hinder them. Victor felt in his heart that they shouldn't have gone, and 2 hours later they were informed that an accident had occurred. Alina was practically tearing her hair out because her sister had gone with them, and almost nothing was left of the car, only a charred skeleton. The traffic police officers didn't allow Alina near the remains. Doctors were still collecting the deceased in black bags. 3 days later, the funerals took place. Alina barely held herself together during the farewell ceremony. Her sister Svetlana was always by her side, not leaving her for a step after the funerals. Alina had spent a week trying to recover and come to terms with the fact that she no longer had a husband and son. Having become a widow, she vowed never to have relationships with anyone again. In her eyes, all men simply ceased to exist. Regarding Victor, they had a teenage romance during their school years that didn't lead to anything. They dated, spent time together, and helped each other with homework. But after school, their paths diverged, and their communication ceased completely. Alina became a medical school student and decided to pursue a career in medicine. She had always been fascinated by chemistry and biology since her school days, and her teachers predicted a future as a top-notch specialist, if not a great scientist. Almost everything came true, and Alina secured a position as a surgeon. When she learned that Victor was in their clinic, she hurried to visit him. And to her surprise, instead of finding a comatose patient, she discovered a perfectly healthy and lively man. Naturally, she had an immediate question, and how should I understand this? I'll explain everything, Victor replied. You see, I started having doubts about my fiancée, Christina. She has been behaving strangely lately, and recently I found out that she wanted to kill me. Are you serious? Alina asked, astonished. Absolutely. That's why I had to pretend to be a comatose patient. Well, you came up with an original way, Alina said, trying to hold back her laughter. And here I was, rushing to your room like a madwoman, thinking you were really in a critical condition, she added, blushing slightly. I understand, Victor smiled, and in his mind, he thought, it seems she hasn't forgotten about me. These thoughts indicated that Victor believed there was a mutual attraction between them, and he wasn't mistaken. Alina offered not only to participate in his charade, but also to take care of him. And the first thing she did was start bringing food from home. As a result, Victor had to decline the restaurant services, but he didn't regret it one bit because Alina was an amazing cook. In the end, he realized that he had developed feelings for her as well. Memories of their school years and moonlit dates flooded back. Victor was even glad that everything turned out this way. However, he couldn't stop anxiously waiting for updates from Detective Dmitri, who promised to provide a report soon. Dmitri's voice had an unsteady tremor, which didn't bode well. Victor found time to spend with Alina in the secluded areas of the clinic, usually in the evenings when the entire medical staff was occupied with their own tasks or watching their favorite TV shows. During this time, Victor believed that Christina would typically be visiting nightclubs, so they weren't afraid of her showing up. After a few days, the detective arrived with preliminary information, and his expression made it clear that he didn't have good news. After taking a sip of water from the glass on the bedside table, Dmitri spoke. I want to warn you, Christina is keeping an eye on your condition. What makes you say that? Victor frowned. I've been observing her for a long time and documenting all her moves, the detective replied. Once I saw Christina with a lawyer. Well, what of it? Victor asked. Maybe she wanted to make a prenuptial agreement. If only it were that simple, Dmitri said, his voice filled with concern. I investigated and found out that this lawyer was digging into information about your business. I have a feeling that Christina is after your money. Interesting, Victor crossed his arms and mused while pacing the room. So you're saying she hired a lawyer to take away my fortune. But I haven't figured it all out yet. That's not all I wanted to tell you, the detective interrupted. Christina was seen with another man. They were engaged in a lively discussion, but I couldn't hear what they were saying because I couldn't get close. They are likely involved in an intimate relationship. In other words, they're lovers. Perhaps you're right, Victor was on the phone with someone at that time, and maybe it was the same man you saw. We need to find out as much as we can about him and their plans. I'm already working on it, the detective replied, but it takes time. Christina rarely appears in public, and it's impossible to get close to her. She has become suspicious and constantly changes her routes. Then she must be plotting something serious, Victor said. You need to hurry, or we may be too late. The detective promised to speed up the investigation, but Victor was disappointed with the information he received. He didn't expect Christina to attempt taking away his business, especially considering she didn't know if her fiancé would return or not. The doctors had said it could take months. Christina must have decided to accelerate events to avoid ending up with nothing. Victor wanted to take the risk and expose his cards by inviting Christina to his room, but following Alina's advice, he decided to wait a little longer. Besides, Christina hadn't made any attempts to get rid of him yet. She continued to see another man and consult with lawyers while the detective carefully documented all these details. Unfortunately, he had little information to share. Several more days passed, and nobody bothered or killed him, or rather, no one came or attacked him. It seemed as though the bride and her lover had changed their minds. However, a sense of fear still lingered, and Victor expected a twist at any moment. Unable to bear it any longer, he decided to end this comedy by calling off the detective. Victor instructed Nurse Tatiana to call Christina and urgently summon her to the clinic. She was unhappy about having to interrupt important matters. She had just begun laying the groundwork to take over her fiance's business, and now she received an urgent invitation to the clinic. Christina expected to see anything but Victor's resurrection. His return to reality was not part of her plans. Christina hoped that the doctors hadn't made a mistake, and that Victor should have spent at least a few months in a coma. With these thoughts in mind, she arrived at the clinic. She rudely swung open the door to the room and almost stumbled. Victor was lying on the bed with his eyes open, smiling, while a nurse adjusted his pillow. For a moment, Christina was speechless, not knowing what to say. Then Victor took charge of the situation and said, "Well, hello there, my dear. You must have missed me while I was forcibly asleep. I can't believe my eyes. The wonders medicine can do. Christina managed to respond. That's not all. I heard they're even resurrecting the dead. Victor decided to joke. But in my case, they wouldn't have had to do anything. Christina didn't understand what that meant. I wasn't in a coma, Victor replied. And why did you need to do this? You see, I had doubts about your trustworthiness. Victor continued his story. You frequently disappeared without explaining where and why, secretly talking to someone on the phone. Those were my personal matters, Christina tried to evade. Yes, that's true, Victor nodded. But lately there have been excessive expenses and suspicious actions on your part. So I decided to pretend to be a catatonic patient. He told her everything she already knew, especially about the phone call in the hospital room, the meetings with another man, and her attempts to take over his business, including her intention to poison Victor. Step by step, he presented the facts, confirming that he had been surveilling her. Christina could barely get a word in as Victor didn't give her a chance to speak. He was furious with her and didn't hold back. Finally, he finished presenting evidence of her infidelity and suspicious behavior. Taking a deep breath, Victor asked, "But now, what do you have to say about all of this?" Christina was initially taken aback, not expecting such assertiveness, but then she gathered herself. She straightened up and sharply replied, "I can say a lot if you're willing to listen." "Well, I'm all ears," Victor said, frowning. "Yes, you ruined my life," Christina began. "You broke everything. Look at you, not deserving to be a millionaire. Why is everything happening to you and not me?" After these words, Christina burst into tears and sat on the chair where the nurse had recently been sitting. Tatiana, who had stepped away from the bed, realized that Victor was no longer in danger, but as a precaution, she removed all sharp and cutting objects. She didn't completely close the door, still having some concerns. Meanwhile, Victor was in shock after listening to Christina's story. He couldn't believe that his deceased father turned out not to be his biological father. There had always been a certain strangeness in their appearances. His parents were both Victor blonde, didn't pay much attention to it at the time. On the other hand, there were relatives with a similar hair color, and Victor thought he inherited some genes from them. At that moment, it seemed that his bride wasn't lying when she told him about it. Victor got off the bed and approached Christina. "I didn't know," he said, placing his hand on her shoulder. "To be honest, I purposely looked for you to seek revenge. I had to pay to gather information and find out your exact location. After your father left with you to another city to start over and succeeded, he built a business, provided for you, but forgot about me," Victor replied, sighing heavily. "But let's not forget that you wanted to kill me. Forgive me, but I was on the edge," Victor tried to explain. "Christina, it was as if something took over me, and I didn't understand what I was doing. Thankfully, things didn't escalate too far because of the distance between us," she said, tears streaming down her face, as she sat on a chair. Nurse Tatiana stepped away from the bed, realizing that Victor was no longer in danger, but as a precaution, she removed all sharp and cutting objects. She left them alone in the room, but didn't fully close the door, still harboring some concerns. Victor approached Christina, placing his hand on her shoulder. "I didn't know. Honestly, I deliberately sought you out for revenge. I had to pay to gather information and find out your exact location. But your father, he left with you to another city to start over, and he succeeded. He built a business, provided for you, but he forgot about me. Victor sighed heavily. But let's not forget that you wanted to kill me. I'm sorry, but I was on the edge. Christina wiped her tears gently and asked Victor, I will consult lawyers today to prepare the transfer of half of my fortune. But this is more than I had anticipated. Victor waved his hand dismissively. I don't need anything that belongs to others. Besides, by law, you have the right to start a business. However, I have one request for you. What is it? Victor replied, making it clear that he cared about her well-being. Use this fortune wisely, he said. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say, he added. Yes, I do, Christina nodded and left the room. Victor felt a heaviness in his heart. While things seemed to have cleared up, many unanswered questions arose, especially regarding his father. Why did he, even though not his biological father, abandon his daughter without support? He couldn't have been unaware that his first family also needed money. Something was amiss, and it appeared that the problem lay with Christina's mother. His father wouldn't have simply left his first wife and child without a reason. Victor remembered how his father, Nikolai Sergeyevich, held him and his mother in high regard. He would go to great lengths to provide for them, ensuring they lacked nothing, and there was never a day without a gift. Nikolai Sergeyevich didn't spare any expense, a testament to his respect for family values. Soon, lawyers prepared the necessary documents and called Victor. He went to the office, where Christina also arrived, alone without the man the detective had seen with her. Victor didn't inquire about his whereabouts and simply signed the agreement to divide the spheres of influence in the business. However, Christina suggested giving him the final say. She wasn't well versed in trade and preferred to receive dividends only. Victor agreed to her proposal, as it was mutually beneficial. He remained the de facto owner of the farm, but shared the profits with Christina. This arrangement allowed him to run the business peacefully, without worrying that his stepsister would suddenly bring it to ruin. Victor honestly shared a portion of the inheritance with Christina. They buried the hatchet, which had been hanging over them like the sword of Damocles. His stepsister swore she hadn't intended to send him to the other side. Yes, at first, such thoughts crossed her mind, but then she realized that there would be severe consequences. Most likely, at some point, the fear of losing her freedom outweighed any malicious intentions. Victor forgave Christina, but warned her not to engage in any machinations. In addition, he transferred a portion of the money he inherited from his father to her account. Together, they visited his father's grave, where he was buried next to his mother. Christina stood at the grave, weeping and whispering something to herself, seemingly trying to communicate with the father who abandoned them many years ago. After all these events settled down, Victor continued to see Alina. They enjoyed their time together, despite her vow to avoid other men. Alina was an orphan, not because she grew up in an orphanage, but because all her relatives had passed away. Her parents had died at a young age, leaving a lasting impact on Alina. She increasingly distanced herself from new acquaintances. However, it was different with Victor. Alina felt safe spending her free time with him. They went on weekend trips outside the city and relaxed in nature. Victor shared with her his dreams of having a family, even though it hadn't worked out in the past. Essentially, he projected his thoughts onto his relationship with Alina. From an outsider's perspective, it seemed as if they hadn't lost each other at all, and this temporary break had tested their resilience. Nevertheless, the question of his true father tormented Victor. If Nikolai Sergeyevich became involved with his mother after Victor was already born, then who was his biological father? Why didn't his mother ever tell him anything about it? Of course, now no one could provide answers. Victor could only speculate that his biological father had done something wrong to his mother, and she ended the relationship to erase that person from her life. The reflections on this matter led him to the conclusion that his mother was most likely forced to make that choice. He had no right to judge her because she gave him life. And with the arrival of Nikolai Sergeyevich, their financial problems disappeared. He simply had to accept the fact that his mother made the right decision. At least Victor was spared from concepts like hunger, cold, and poverty. Victor decided to temporarily set aside the question about his father and focus more on his relationship with Alina. Their childhood love enveloped them with romance and prospects, and it seemed that the final chapter was near, and they could start thinking about getting married, especially when Alina hinted that she wanted a strong and assertive husband. They were strolling in a park where they found a burlap sack on the shore of a small pond with ducks. The sack was moving as if it came to life on its own. Victor cautiously approached it and discovered a small puppy inside. He couldn't remain indifferent to such a sight, and Alina almost burst into tears. The puppy looked at them with its black bead-like eyes, and just one look could melt their hearts. Victor and Alina decided to take the puppy, not blaming it for the mistreatment by its previous owners. They understood that those people were cruel, perhaps even monsters, to toss a pet in a sack, hoping it would drown. On the same day, they brought the puppy home, and while Lena bathed it in the bathtub, Victor prepared a treat. The little furry bundle eagerly started eating from its bowl. Looking at it, Victor smiled and said, "Let's name him Jackie." "I like it." Alina nodded in agreement and replied, "I agree." You can't imagine how hard it was for me to watch him struggling in that sack. Victor agreed. Only monsters would do such a thing. But now he's safe and nothing threatens him. That's what matters most to him. Alina suddenly asked, "By the way, how's your half-sister doing? Is she okay?" Victor shrugged and answered, "I don't know. She seems to be still living with that scoundrel. But what's important to me is that she doesn't interfere with our business, settles for the dividends, and keeps quiet." "Do you think she'll come up with a new devious plan?" Alina shook her head and said, "No, Christina got what she wanted. Let's focus on our plans. I only see a family in my future. If you're thinking the same way." Smiling, Victor replied, "I do, honestly." They supported each other, and their direction was clear, towards family happiness. They spent the entire day taking care of the puppy, getting him settled. The next day, they took him to the veterinarian who examined the pet, administered vaccinations, and provided care instructions. The puppy was strong but undernourished. It seemed that its previous owners had starved him before tossing him away. But now their new friend, Jackie, recovered and began to enjoy life. Alina, Victor, and little Jackie formed a warm and loving family. Victor successfully conducted meetings with investors, secured profitable contracts, becoming a benefactor for the clinic where Alina worked as the deputy chief physician. They didn't forget about those in need and supported socially vulnerable citizens. They walked toward their happy future, making plans and overcoming obstacles together. Andrei Yevgenyevich highly appreciated his godson's aspirations. Gradually, Victor and Alina's life gained new meanings, leading them to an important decision. Recently, Victor had intended to propose to Alina. He had already bought engagement rings in advance and selected a country house as the location for the proposal. However, these plans had to be postponed because one day Alina came home feeling distraught. Victor set up a treat on the table and asked, "What happened? Do you have some problems at work?" Alina hesitantly replied, "I was powerless in the face of an unexpected situation." They brought a man straight from the streets to us. She continued to explain that she allowed the treatment of homeless individuals, and they almost threw the man out of the clinic. Alina had to argue with the chief physician about it, but she stood up for what she believed was right. Frowning, Victor asked, "What's wrong with him?" Alina explained that they found the man unconscious, and he urgently needed a blood transfusion. Victor exclaimed, "I have the same blood type." Surprised, Alina asked, "Are you serious?" Victor nodded affirmatively. "During my supposed stay at the clinic, I found out my blood group, and it matches his." Deciding to help, Victor offered to undergo an immediate blood transfusion procedure. The next day, they arrived together at the clinic. Victor was slightly nervous as it was his first transfusion, but he was confident in his decision to help. Before the transfusion began, he peeked into the room where the vagrant lay. The man looked unwell, with a pale face and hands covered in scabs. The transfusion procedure went smoothly, and a few hours later, Victor returned home. Alina stayed at the clinic, filling out paperwork. When she came home, she immediately asked Victor, "Don't you find it strange that our blood turned out to be similar?" Victor replied, "No, it doesn't seem strange. Such things happen in nature." They both realized that the blood type coincidence had helped them assist this person. This experience strengthened their bond and reaffirmed their decision to go through life together, helping others and doing good deeds. Shaking his head, Victor replied, "The man may think so, but it does seem peculiar." Alina continued, "Oh, come on, there's nothing strange about it." Victor reassured her, saying, "It's just a similarity in blood, nothing more." At the same time, Alina still had doubts about it being mere chance. She didn't believe it was a coincidence and decided to have a DNA test to confirm everything. The next day, they took the biological samples of the vagrant and Victor to the laboratory. Alina was told that the results would be ready in a week. During that time, she anxiously awaited the information. Her intuition wouldn't let her rest. A week later, the laboratory director personally called and stunned Alina with the news that Victor and the homeless man were direct relatives. Alina nearly had a seizure, but luckily Andrei Yevgenyevich was nearby and helped revive her. Seeing her distressed face, he cautiously asked, "Can I be happy for my godson and his future child?" "What are you talking about?" Surprised, Alina asked, "Wait, you thought I was pregnant, and it seemed like some hormonal imbalance." The head doctor stumbled, "No, I'm not pregnant yet." Alina shook her head. "What was it then?" Andrei Yevgenyevich persisted. You'll find out anyway, said Alina, so it's better if I tell you. Alina told him the story of the homeless man's admission to their department. Finishing her tale, she looked intently at the head doctor and asked, "What should I do now?" "Inform him, you see," Andrei Yevgenyevich shrugged. "He deserves to know the truth, whatever it may be." "Yes, you're right, that's what I'll do." Alina nodded and hurried home. Upon hearing this news from her, Victor was bewildered. Apparently, he never expected the homeless man to be his direct relative. And if he were to be more frank, Victor didn't envision their meeting like this, especially not with someone who had hit rock bottom in life. On the other hand, it couldn't be said with certainty that it was his fault. That's why, to clear all doubts, Victor accompanied Alina to the clinic. By that time, the man was able to move around the room independently and interact with the medical staff. Victor cautiously opened the door to the room and greeted the homeless man, saying, "Good day." "Hello," the man replied cautiously. "My name is Victor." He extended his hand. "And I'm Boris," the vagrant responded. Shaking his hand gently, Victor said, "Here's the thing. I became a donor and helped with the transfusion." "Yes, thank you. The nurse has already told me everything." Boris nodded and extended his hand again in gratitude. "I will be indebted to you for life. I will light a candle for you in church." "It's nice to hear that, of course," Victor responded, "but I would like to hear from you about how you parted ways, not on Kovalevskaya Street." The vagrant even flinched upon hearing the name and surname of the woman. Clutching his heart, he sat down on the bed and whispered softly, "It was so long ago, yet I'm curious." He was on his own trajectory. "Why do you need to know?" Boris cautiously asked. "I am her son," Victor calmly replied. "It can't be, it can't be," Boris cried as tears streamed down his face. "It's all my fault. Calm down, everything is fine. No one is going to blame you," Victor reassured him. Placing his hand on Boris's shoulder, Boris began to recount his past vividly and in detail. It turned out that Victor and Nina had a warm relationship. They even planned to get married, but soon broke up due to a foolish misunderstanding. Boris became jealous of her childhood friend, and they had a big fight over it, even though there was no reason for jealousy. Nina told him she never wanted to see him again. After their breakup, Boris ended up behind bars for beating up a rich man who was harassing Nina and trying to force himself on her. Boris stood up for her, but he underestimated his own strength, and he was sent to prison for a long time. Eventually, he learned that Nina died in a car accident and decided to erase her from his memory completely. Over time, Nina gave birth to a son whom she named Victor. Nikolai came into the picture, ignoring the fact that she already had a child, and he fell in love with Nina. He proposed that they live together and became a stepfather to Victor, although the boy retained his mother's surname. Nina was glad that the difficulties in her life were over, and she carefully hid Victor's true parentage from Nikolai. After his release from prison, Boris began rebuilding his life. He had no support from his deceased parents, and his relatives turned their backs on him. He found a job and tried to start anew. He didn't want to interfere with Nina's new family and kept his true paternity of Victor a secret from Nikolai. Victor had contemplated this matter many times and wanted to uncover all the pieces of the story to solve the puzzle of his past. Now he knew the truth about what had happened between his parents. He approached his father, stood up from the bed, and walked around the room. Alina stood near the window, watching him. Victor told his father that the past was behind them, and they needed to live in the present. Boris cautiously asked if Victor was sure. Victor nodded and said that there was no longer a reason for resentment. They both made mistakes and paid the price for them. He only regretted that his mother never acknowledged his true parentage. Boris shrugged and apologized to his son for not taking any action. Victor hugged his father tightly and said he had been waiting for this moment for so long. Boris replied that it wasn't Victor's fault since he didn't know about his birth. They were both happy that they were able to rebuild their relationship, and Boris moved to live with Victor in the countryside. Of course, it was clear that Boris had no experience in business, but he excelled as a supplier. Victor found strong support in his biological father, while not forgetting his stepfather, who had done a lot to provide a comfortable life for the children. Together, they visited the cemetery and paid their respects to the departed. The father silently looked at the gravestone and shed quiet tears, while Nina appeared to be looking at him from the monument, smiling as if nothing had happened. Victor purposely chose that photograph to make his mother look less gloomy. Life took on new colors, and soon Victor proposed to Alina. The engagement rings finally had their moment, and everything happened exactly as he had planned in the countryside home. The father wholeheartedly congratulated the young couple and wished them all the best. He also hinted that he would like to live long enough to see his grandchildren, which would be true happiness for him. Embracing their son and Alina, Boris said, "We never thought." Victor hesitated for a moment with a response. "But anything can happen. What do you say, beloved?" "We'll live and see," Alina replied with a smile. A month later, they officially got married, and the wedding took place in their countryside home. They invited all their acquaintances and loved ones. The families of the guests were so numerous that they had to set up additional tables in the gazebo. But this only made the wedding celebration even more magnificent. Victor and Alina were at the center of attention, receiving warm words of congratulations and generous gifts from the guests. And a couple of months later, Alina delighted the family with the news of her pregnancy. The men were overjoyed. If you enjoyed the story, I hope for your support with an upvote. Thank you and have a great day.